The trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, the teenager who killed two men in self-defense during the Kenosha riots, is coming to a close. Jury instructions are already going on, and closing arguments are being made. Now, to the impartial observer, the prosecution has done an absolutely terrible job at presenting their case. Perhaps that's because the case never should have been brought in the first place, but the result is the same, a mockery of our justice system. But in all the idiocy that has spewed desperately out of the Assistant District Attorney Thomas Binger's mouth, I think we have finally reached peak absurdity today. It was a very long, painful, and embarrassing road for all those involved with the prosecution to get to this point, filled with irrelevant questions about video games and laughable comments about ammo types. But ladies and gentlemen, we finally made it. While giving his closing arguments, Binger made several outright false assertions and attempted to make the case that self-defense with a gun is essentially never allowed. Now, Mr. Binger's desperation to appease his leftist echo chamber obviously has no breaking point. We'll watch the clip right after this quick commercial break to pay some bills. Friends, I'm going to point out the obvious. It seems like big government and big tech are trying to destroy America. Everything they touch turns into a disaster. Pretty soon the whole system will fall apart, and the first thing to fall will be the food supply chain. So, do you have enough emergency food to get through a serious long-term crisis where you can't get food at the grocery store? Most people don't, and they'll panic when the time comes. That is why the smart move now is to get long-term storage emergency food before things go bad. I highly recommend My Patriot Supply. They've served millions of American families and have over 41,000 4-star and 5-star reviews. Their mission is your survival, and right now you can save 25% on a 4-week kit of emergency food that will save the day, probably soon. Order a starter kit for each member of your family and they'll ship everything quickly and discreetly to your door. Go to preparewithresurgence.com so you can claim your 4-week emergency food kit and save 25% in the process. That's preparewithresurgence.com or hit that link in the description box.
They have to convince you that Joseph Rosenbaum was going to take that gun and use it on the defendant because they know you can't claim self-defense against an unarmed man like this. You lose the right to self-defense when you're the one who brought the gun because they know you can't claim self-defense against an unarmed man like this. You lose the right to self-defense when you're the one who brought the gun.
Okay, so Binger attempts to make the argument that you cannot claim self-defense against an unarmed man, but that's not at all how this works. More people are killed with fists every year than AR-15s, and the idea that the other individual must also have a gun of his own to represent a deadly threat is clearly not true and just outright moronic. Now, Rosenbaum had threatened Rittenhouse multiple times earlier in the night and was chasing down the teen, and no serious person would argue that it was to have a friendly chat. There is no legal requirement that a person has to allow another person to physically beat them, risking the possibility of serious injury or death before trying to defend themselves. Now the question is, how many idiots watching CNN tonight will believe this garbage? One can only wonder. In the words of the great Chris Plant, every day is an IQ test when you're a Democrat. Secondly, Binger makes the absolutely asinine argument that you, quote, lose the right to self-defense if you have a gun. Under no law that I'm aware of, much less in Wisconsin, are you barred from defending yourself if you happen to be carrying a gun. Hell, the entire point of carrying a firearm on your person is to be able to defend yourself in the event a threat rises, and Rosenbaum, by his own admission, was a deadly threat. Lastly, even amid all the incorrect statements, Binger actually makes Rittenhouse's defense case for him twice, repeating that the teenager feared Rosenbaum would shoot him when the latter went for his gun. Yeah, well, that's why it's self-defense. Now, I don't know what's going to happen from here. I know nothing, absolutely nothing, is for sure in this country right now. But I'd be shocked and dismayed if Rittenhouse were found guilty after all this. And to be sure, this goes past just his individual future. You see, if someone can be convicted of murder for so obviously defending themselves, on video no less, then the right to self-defense truly doesn't exist anymore. One thing I know for sure is that this prosecutor is a joke and he should be ashamed of himself. This is the classic situation where a political hack is trying to throw someone in jail for life in order to bolster their profile. You see, he knows he has no case, but he really doesn't give a shit. This is all a game to him, and hopefully justice prevails. Oh, and hopefully he rots in hell slowly.
People are totally absorbed in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, and you have to ask, why is that? Why is it so fascinating? Well, part of the reason it's just so interesting is because the facts are so different from what we've been told for more than a year, completely different. And it's shocking to compare reality against the version of reality we've been force-fed. Here's one example. Just days after Rittenhouse was first arrested, that was back in August of 2020, a pro-censorship organization called PolitiFact published what it called a fact check of the case. In a posting on its website, PolitiFact claimed that Kyle Rittenhouse had committed a crime by carrying a firearm in the state of Wisconsin. Here's the quote. "It is against the law in Wisconsin for someone younger than 18 to possess a dangerous weapon, period." Now, you notice in that statement complete unwavering certainty. And this is common for PolitiFact, which issues opinions like they're edicts from God himself. They do this because the social media companies reward it. Social media companies use PolitiFact's edicts as a pretext to censor any speech online that contradicts the official line of the Democratic Party, the so-called narrative. So if PolitiFact disagrees with what you're posting, then you are by definition spreading misinformation and you must be silenced. That's how it works. So naturally, other media organizations echoed this position immediately. Kyle Rittenhouse, 17, declared the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, was not old enough to legally carry the assault-style rifle he had, end quote. Again, just stating it as fact. And then the entire national media followed suit and told us the same thing. The problem was, it was a lie. In fact, under Wisconsin law, which apparently no one in any newsroom in America had even bothered to check, 17-year-olds are allowed to carry rifles as long as their barrels meet a minimum length requirement, and Kyle Rittenhouse's rifle met that requirement. So no, Kyle Rittenhouse did not violate Wisconsin's gun laws. Today, even the prosecution at the trial was forced to admit that. And so immediately the judge dismissed the firearms charge.
Isn't legal?
It is not a short-barreled shotgun or a short-barreled rifle, yes.
Either by barrel or by overall length?
Correct.
All right, and then count 6 is dismissed.
Ooh, well, that couldn't be clearer. The prosecution is admitting in open court that it was legal. He had not committed a gun crime, and that means that for more than a year, big tech and its lackeys throughout our media have spread misinformation about Kyle Rittenhouse. Well, that's embarrassing. What are they going to say? Well, they're not going to admit it, of course. They're going to make certain you don't learn about it. Just minutes after the judge in the case dismissed the gun charge, YouTube, which is owned by Google, censored the video streams of several independent legal experts who were commenting on the trial in real time. These were knowledgeable attorneys, many of whom were critical of the obvious weaknesses in the prosecution's case. Now, hundreds of people were watching those streams at the moment they were canceled. But concerned that Americans might conclude that Kyle Rittenhouse is innocent, YouTube shut them down, citing, quote, policy violations. In other words, God forbid people think for themselves. That's not allowed anymore. If you want to know what's happening in your world, you've got MSNBC to tell you.
Let's keep our fingers crossed. Either way, the aftermath will be interesting. Most of this came by way of redstate.com. If you liked it, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment down below. There's a PayPal link in the description box, so please put $1 in the bucket on the way out the door. I'd like to thank everyone for all your donations. They're much needed and much appreciated. Now, with all that being said, we'll see you next time.
Come on, move. Move. Easy, easy.